welcome in this session. This session, we are going to see how we can do composition of three functions in different orders of composition. So the problem is evaluate F composed with G composed with H, F composed with H composed with G, G composed F composed with H, G composed with H composed with F, H composed with F composed with G, and finally H composed with G composed with F. Given that f of x is 3x squared plus 3, g of x is cos of x, and h of x is tan of x. Now to solve this, let's start with the first part. F composed with G composed with H is the same thing as writing F composed with G composed with H. And because all the functions are in terms of x, then you say of x, which is the same thing as you write f, the function, to the left, and what remains to the right becomes the input. So that's step one. Step two, you interpret what is in the square bracket. So we have f, g, h of x. So that's what we have. So then we just do it step by step. So we'll have f of g, where there's h of x from the equation, we replace by tan of x. Now we are giving the function g a new input called tan x. And how does g operate? You give it an input called x, it defines its cosine. So when you give it tan x, it will define the cosine of the tan x, which is the input. So this will be f of, now this will be g of tan x, the same as cosine of that tan x. So the new input for the function f is cos of tan x. And when you give f an x, it takes that x, squares it, multiplies the answer by 3, and then add 3. So when you give this input, it will do 3 times the input raised power 2, and then adds 3. This can be written as 3 cos squared of tan x plus 3. So this is how the first part will be. And then the second part, we want to define f composed with h composed with g. By definition, this is the same as writing f composed with h composed with g of x, because all the functions are given in terms of x. This will be the same as f, right hand side becomes the input, and then you also define this part. So that will be f and then h of g of x, which will be f of, and then where there's g of x, by definition, g of x is given by cosine of x. So we are giving now the function h a new input called cosine of x. I remember h of x by definition is given by tan of x. G of x is given by cos of x, and f of x is given by 3x squared plus 3. So when you give h an input called cos x, it will define the tan of that input. That's how it operates. So h of x is tan of x. So any input you give it, you define the tan of the input. So this will be f tan of the input cos x. So the function f is given a new input called tan of cos x. And how does f operate? It takes 3 multiplied by the square of the input plus 3. So we'll have 3. The input is tan of cos of x and then we square it, then add 3. So that can as well be written as 3 tan squared of cosine of x plus 3. So that will be the answer to the second part. Third part, we want to define g composed with f composed with h. And remember the f of x in this question is given by 3x squared plus 3. G of x is given by cos of x. H of x is given by tan of x. So by definition, this is g of g composed with f composed with h of x, which is g. This becomes the input. You also define this composition, g of f of h of x which will be g of f. Now what is h of x? We put tan of x. Now, when you give f tan x, it will square it, multiplies by 3, and then add the result to 3, which can be written as g 3 tan squared x plus 3. And when you give g and x, it defines cosine of x. So when you give it this value, it will define cosine of that input because of 3 tan squared x plus 3. This bracket must be there too, and says that we are defining cosine of all these values. So that is answer to part 3. Part 4, we want to define g composed with h composed with f of x. So by definition, this will be g h composed with f of x, which will be g h of f of x, and then you write it as g of h. The function f of x is given by 3x squared plus 3, and then h of x from our equation is given by tan of x, and g of x from the equation is given by cosine of x. So when you give h an input 3x squared plus 3, by its definition, it will simply define the tan of that input. So it will be tan of 3x squared plus 3. Now when you give g this input, it will define its cosine. So therefore, we'll have cosine of tan 3x squared plus 3. So that is the answer to part 4. Part 5, we need to define h composed with f composed with g. By definition, you write h of f of h of f composed with g of x, which will be h of f of g of x. Now that will be h of f of, remember, g of x is given by cosine of x. And remember, the function f of x is given by 3x squared plus 3. And then g of x is given by cosine of x, and h of x is given by tan of x. So to define f of cos of x, we'll get 3 times that input, cos of x raised power 2, and then we add 3. This we can simplify to h of 3 cos squared x plus 3. So we are giving h a new input called 3 cos squared x plus 3. And whenever you give h any input, it defines its tan. So this will be simply tan of 3 cos squared x plus 3. So this is how we get the answer to part 5. And lastly, number 6, we need to define h composed with g composed with f of x. This by definition is h of g composed with f of x, which is h of g of f of x. Now we write it as h g f of x from the question is given by 3x squared plus 3. And g of x from the question is given by cosine of x, and h of x is tan of x. So this will just give us h of, when you define g of x, 3x squared plus 3, the same as cosine of the input. So h of the input will be the same as the tan of the input. So we'll have tan of the input cosine of 3x squared plus 3. So that's what we have as the value of that given function. So this is the final answer to number 6. Thank you.